Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to get into the science behind one of the world's most popular herbal supplements, Echinacea.
I mean, you've definitely seen it on pharmacy shelves, right? But what does the science actually say? Can it really fight off the common cold? Is it a centuries-old remedy, or just a really popular placebo?
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at its popularity and a big paradox that comes with it. Then, we'll dive into its chemical toolkit, see how it interacts with our immune system, weigh the evidence for prevention versus treatment, and finally, we'll come to a final verdict.
All right, first up, let's dig into why Echinacea is so popular and at the same time so controversial in the science world.
So its history goes way, way back. We're talking centuries ago, with Native American tribes in the Great Plains using it for everything from wounds and toothaches to infections. Then, in the late 1800s, it got marketed as a cure-all, but its fame kind of fizzled out when antibiotics hit the scene. But then, boom, the 1970s hit, and it made this massive comeback that's still going strong today. And that long history, it's really cemented its place as a go-to remedy. I mean, we're talking about one of the top-selling herbal supplements in the US and Europe, period. The market is worth hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and almost all of that is driven by one thing: fighting the common cold. But here's the big paradox. This quote really says it all. The evidence is mixed and therefore controversial. So even though millions of people swear by it, the scientific community just can't seem to agree on whether it actually works. And that's exactly why we need to dig a little deeper.
So, what's the deal with all this controversy? Well, it's mostly because Echinacea isn't just one single thing. It's more like a complex chemical factory. Which brings us to our next section, where we're going to unpack its chemical toolkit.
Okay, so the plant's power comes from these things called phytochemicals. You can just think of them as the tools in its chemical toolkit. These are the active compounds that actually interact with our bodies. And inside this toolkit, there are four main classes of compounds. You've got alkamides, caffeic acid derivatives, we'll just call them CADs, polysaccharides, and glycoproteins. Now, the key thing to remember here is that it's believed to be the combination of all these working together that gives Echinacea its punch. Okay, and this is super important. Where these chemicals are in the plant really matters. Alkamides, they're packed into the roots. Those CADs, they're mostly in the leaves and flowers. And this difference is a huge reason why one Echinacea product off the shelf can have a totally different effect from the one right next to it. So we've got this chemical toolkit. How does it actually work once it's in our system? Well, that's what we're looking at next, how it hacks our immunity through something called immunomodulation.
Right, so you might hear people call Echinacea an immune booster, but scientists have a much more precise term, immunomodulator. And that's a key difference. It doesn't just crank the volume of your immune system up to 11, it actually helps to fine-tune and regulate its activity.
So how does it do that? Well, it activates the key players in what's called our innate immune system. You can think of it like putting your body's defense team on high alert. We're talking about macrophages, the Pac-Man cells that go around eating invaders, and natural killer cells, which are specialists at taking out infected cells. And here's a look at one of the main ways it works. First, those alkamides we mentioned get absorbed. Then, they literally lock on to these special receptors on our immune cells. That connection kicks off a whole signaling cascade. It's like an internal alarm system going off, telling all the other cells to get ready for a fight. This whole tuning process also helps rebalance our body's chemical messengers, which are called cytokines. See, when you've got a cold, your body is flooded with pro-inflammatory signals that cause stuff like a sore throat. What some research suggests is that Echinacea can actually dial back some of those signals, which could be why it helps reduce that inflammation and makes you feel a bit better.
Okay, so the biology seems to check out. We know the mechanism. But does any of this actually translate to real results in people? Let's find out. We're going to look at what the human trials say about using it for prevention versus treatment.
All right, so when you look at all the big studies, a really clear split emerges. It seems Echinacea is a lot more effective for preventing a cold, so stopping you from getting sick in the first place, than it is for treating a cold once you've already got it. In fact, the evidence for shortening a cold is, well, it's pretty weak and inconclusive across the board. And to put some numbers on that, a major Cochrane review, and that's kind of the gold standard for evidence, lumped a bunch of studies together. Their conclusion: some Echinacea products might reduce your risk of catching a cold by about 10 to 20%. Now that's not a magic bullet, but it's not nothing either. It's a modest, but maybe significant benefit.
So that brings us back to the big question. Why all the controversy? Why do some really good studies show a benefit, especially for prevention, while others show pretty much no effect at all?
Well, the answer really goes back to that chemical toolkit we talked about earlier. The problem is, different clinical trials use different species of the plant, different parts of the plant, roots versus leaves, and different ways to get the compounds out. There's just no standardization, so you're not comparing apples to apples, and that's why the results are all over the map.
Okay, so after all that, where do we land? What's the final verdict on Echinacea? Let's wrap it all up.
All right, let's boil this all down to the 4 most important takeaways. First, Echinacea is not one thing. It's a complex cocktail of active compounds. Second, it acts as an immunomodulator, which means it tunes your immune system. It doesn't just boost it. Third, and this is a big one, the best evidence we have points to it helping prevent colds, not really treat them. And finally, not all Echinacea products are created equal, not by a long shot, because there's no standardization.
And this quote from the research just sums it all up perfectly. The magic, if you want to call it that, isn't in one single molecule. It's in the complex, synergistic orchestra of all these different compounds working together.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought, right? We've just seen the incredible pharmacological complexity that can be packed inside one common plant. It really makes you wonder, what other powerful natural medicines are out there, just waiting for science to unlock their secrets?